Hi guys, this is Alessandro. In this video, I'm going to show you how to service your gears, how to replace a motor, how to do the backlash, or anything related to the gear. The tools that you need are some gloves, 12mm spanner, a 4 and a 3 Allen key, or a wrench, whatever you prefer, some cutters, a thread locker, and grease. So first thing you need to do is to remove this screw, and you use your 4mm Allen key and the 12mm socket, and you lose it. Then you need to disconnect the steering with the 4mm Allen key. Now, you need to remove the sex bolts here, and to do that, you push this out. It might be a little bit hard to actually remove this, so it's suggested to take the two 4mm Allen key and loose a little bit these two screws, and then push this out. At this stage, you can see there is two type of washers right at the top here. Once we remove this, they will fall, so make sure you don't lose them. And at this point, we can flip the board up. And last thing you need to do to access the drive shaft is to cut the steel wire, and then you have access to this. Okay, now there are 5 screws that you need to remove. Once you remove this, the plates will come off and the gears will be exposed. Okay, now that all 5 screws are out, we can move the plate and see the gears. Okay, now it's time to inspect the gears. Go through the gears, spin the motor, and check if there is any teeth that deform or they're missing or anything. In this case, they look perfect. They're just a bit greasy. So if everything's fine, then check if the backlash is also okay. To check the backlash, you hold, let's say, the big gear, and you're trying to spin a small gear. So in this case, the backlash is also very good. You can see how when it moves the little gear, this moves straight away. And also, it's easy to spin. There is not really any gap between the two gears. So in this case, you can just skip and watch the video to when we degrease it, how to degrease it. Otherwise, if it's not like that, your gears, we have to remove the gear and do the backlash again. Okay, in this step, I'm going to show you how to remove the gear. To remove the gear, you have to remove the big gear and the small gear at the same time. The reason is because the gears are kind of like that, and you don't want to remove one without removing the other one. Otherwise, you might damage the bigger gear. So to do so, you just press. You can press with your thumb on the hard drive and push a little bit. At the same time, also pull on the small gear. Next, if you need to remove the motor, you need to unscrew these 4. You don't have to do this if you just need to do the backlash. So just do this if you need to replace the motor. Now that all 4 screws are removed, you can safely slide the plate out. And at this point, you need to open the deck to disconnect the motor from the inside. Next, you need to remove the plate that holds the cable in place. Once you remove all 4 screws, you'll be able to remove the plate. At this point, you can access the 2 cables that go to in this case, the right motor. So you disconnect the sensor cable and the phase cable, and you can slide the motor out from the hole into the bulkhead, just like so. Let's say now you have a new motor. You do exactly the same operation, but in the opposite. So you put the 2 cables through the hole. Once you put the cable back in there, we reconnect the cables. So the phase has a key. And same thing for this. If it doesn't fit easily, don't press it in. You probably need to swap it. At this point, what we do, we will install the phase cable between the 2 ESC, 1 and 2. We put the sensor cable on the side, just like so. We organize it after, once the motor is back in place. We grab our plate, we put it on top of it. We make sure that no cables, especially this little one, have been squished or pinched. It's important that when you are tightening the screw, that the cable is still loose. So it's suggested that as you tighten this, just to move the cable so you can make sure that it's still moving and it's not pinching, as you can see. Okay, now the motor is in place. We'll bring it up because it's easy to access. So next, you need to put a bit of thread locker on each of these holes, and you want to install the plate. Now, be aware which direction the cable came off. So in this case, the cable always needs to come on the top, like so. So this is going to go like so. Okay, next, what you need to do is make sure that these screws are not completely tight, because if they are, you won't be able to move the motor for the backlash. So a little trick is to go all the way in, like so, and then just pick it off just enough so you can still move the plate. Okay, you can cut that. So you can see at this point, you can move the plate along the motor, so you can do the backlash. This is good because these screws are not too tight. Now, let's put the gears on and do the actual backlash. When you install the gear, make sure that you have the right direction, because if this was like that, obviously it will not fall in. So make sure this is like so. And then the first thing you need to do is to match the drive to the holes of the plate, like so. And then what you want to do is to match the D shaft to the pulley. So as you can see at this point, the gears are quite a bit apart. So this is too much gap between. So we need to bring these two gears together and then tighten these two screws. So to tighten this, you can hold on to the drive and the motor at the same time and squeeze it like so. Then grab your 3mm Allen key and tighten this. You don't need to tie super hard just yet. Just make sure it keeps the gears in place. At this point, we want to make sure that both gears are parallel to the plate, and then we can go and check the backlash. You can see here the gap, it's quite small, very good. The test to see if this is good or not is we need to grab a piece of paper and run it through. Put the piece of paper inside and let the gear grab it. You can see how it's still easy to turn, which is really good. And you can see also there is the shape of the gears onto the paper. This looks good. You can still see that there is a little bit of movement, but it's not too much. So this is the ideal backlash that you want to see. Next, we need to degrease it. First thing, we need to remove the old grease. Just use a piece of paper. Also clean the gears. If the grease is quite old, use some grease remover. In this case, the grease is pretty new, so I'm just going to put the grease on top of it. So you can use different type of grease. What we suggest is Model 1, which is pretty popular, is to find. If you can't find this one here, this is also fine. It's a little bit cheaper. As long as, like for example, in this case, it has PTFE, which is Teflon. So it's not just a lithium-based grease, but it has some sort of synthetic grease. As you can see, this is Mobile synthetic grease, and this is also synthetic grease. Next, we want to start greasing the teeth. So get a good amount on your finger and just shove it in there. Okay, as you can see, we try to put as much grease as possible, try to leave as little as possible air between the teeth. And then once you're happy with this, you go and install the grease inside the case. Usually more grease there is, the better. So don't be stingy with the grease. It will stay in here and it will make your gears last a bit longer. Okay, once you finish putting the grease like so, you don't really need to put grease around the bearing, so just trying to put it around the case. Then we are ready to put the motor back inside the enclosure. This is a good time to also clean any grease that came out. Next, put a bit of thread locker into the screw, and then put the 5 screws that you removed initially back in place to hold the plate. Once all 5 screws are back in place, we can reinstall the drive shaft inside the drive. It's a good time this also to check that the caps are still intact. If they're not, just replace them. And also check the grease in here, it's also still good and there is still plenty. In this case, there is plenty, so we need to replace it. Otherwise, you can use the same grease you use it for the gearbox. Next, we install the steel wire or a zip tie, whatever it's easier for you. As long as the zip tie doesn't have a big head and not going to touch on the motor that is spinning. If you have used a steel wire, bend it down like so. So when the motor spins in this direction, even if it touches, it's always going to press it down. Then we put a drop of a thread locker again here, and we'll reinstall the steering link to the same position as originally was. In this case, was at the top. Make your life easier, flip the board over, and then we just need to install the last part, which is up here. Okay, last thing, we want to put the sex bolt in. Make sure that the taper washers, which is these conical washers, facing always the smaller part towards the rod end. So let's just do that. Then grab your 12mm socket, put a little bit of thread lock on the M6 countersunk. And there you have it. Here's how you replace motor, do the backlash, and do everything else related to the gear. If you have any question, email us to hello or support@bahabo.com.au, and we'll be able to help you with all your queries.